A group of racist teenage bullies attack an elderly black man in the park, laughing, filming, and mocking him like it's just another prank for their followers. But what they don't know is, this man used to sit on the federal bench. He's a retired judge who spent decades dismantling systems just like the one that raised them. They thought they were humiliating a nobody. Instead, they sparked a movement that could bring down their families, their school, and their entire future. And when the truth goes public, it's not just their reputations on the line, it's everything they've ever taken for granted. What happens when the victim of your hate turns out to be the most powerful man you've ever crossed? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Leonard kept his eyes on his book, though the words had long since blurred together. The boys' voices carried across the park, each crude joke and snicker growing louder as they circled closer like vultures sizing up prey. He'd seen their type before, privileged kids who'd never faced real consequences, treating the world like their personal playground. The warm Georgia sun beat down through the oak trees, casting dappled shadows across the weathered park bench. Leonard adjusted his plain cotton shirt, smoothing out a wrinkle. His cane rested against his leg, its worn handle polished smooth from years of use. The half-eaten sandwich sat beside him, wrapped in wax paper that crinkled in the light breeze. "Yo, check this out," one of the boys called out, not bothering to lower his voice. "We got ourselves a real historical artifact right here." Leonard recognized that voice. Brett Halston, son of the local real estate developer. The boy had his father's arrogance, though none of his subtlety. Behind him trailed Mason Beecham, whose mother sat on the school board, and Cody Fields, a quiet kid who seemed to follow the others more out of habit than malice. Brett held up his phone, already recording. "Ladies and gentlemen of TikTok, we're coming to you live from the Senior Citizen Safari." His voice took on an exaggerated documentary tone. Here we observe the wild welfare recipient in his natural habitat. Mason's laughter burst out like a gunshot. "Yeah, spending our tax dollars on that gourmet sandwich, right?" Leonard carefully turned a page, his weathered fingers steady, despite the tension building in his shoulders. The book was Maya Angelou's "I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings," fitting, given the moment. He'd read it countless times over the decades, finding new meaning with each pass. "Hey, Grandpa," Brett called out, stepping closer. The phone stayed trained on Leonard's face. "How about an interview for our social media followers? Share some wisdom from back in the day." Cody hung back, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Maybe we should just go," he muttered. But Mason elbowed him hard in the ribs. "Don't be such a wuss," Mason hissed. "This is gonna be epic." The boys moved in closer, forming a loose semicircle around the bench. Brett's phone captured everything. Leonard's worn shoes, his simple clothes, the old cane. The teenager's voice dripped with mock respect. "So, tell us, old-timer, what's it like living off the government? Must be nice, right? Sitting around all day, reading books on the taxpayer's dime?" Leonard remained still, his expression neutral. He'd faced worse than these boys during his years on the bench. Death threats from Klan members, burning crosses on his lawn, dead animals left on his doorstep. These children, with their phones and their practiced cruelty, were nothing but shadows of old hatred. "Look at him, trying to ignore us," Mason sneered, puffing up his chest. "Probably can't even hear us over his Social Security check cashing." Brett zoomed in closer with his phone. "Nah, he's just showing off his reading skills. That's a pretty big book for someone from the projects, right? Maybe we should quiz him?" Leonard could feel their presence looming over him now, blocking out the sunlight. The peaceful afternoon had transformed into something darker, something all too familiar. Still, he kept his eyes on the page, his dignity intact. "Come on, Gramps," Brett pressed, his voice taking on an ugly edge. Give us something for the followers. Show us your best shuffle dance. Or maybe tell us about picking cotton. That's what your generation did, right? Cody's face had gone pale. Brett, this is messed up. Let's just... Shut up, Brett snapped, never lowering his phone. This is content gold. Watch and learn. The air grew thick with tension as the boys closed in further. Leonard could smell their expensive cologne, hear the rustle of their designer clothes. His hand rested lightly on his cane, not in threat, but in preparation. He'd learned long ago that sometimes silence was the strongest response, and sometimes it only invited escalation. Brett leaned in close to the phone, speaking in an exaggerated whisper. Ladies and gentlemen, our subject appears to be displaying classic avoidance behavior. Perhaps we need to provoke a more interesting response for our viewers? Mason cracked his knuckles, a sound like breaking twigs. Yeah, maybe he needs some encouragement to participate in our little documentary. The afternoon sun continued to shine, oblivious to the darkness gathering around the park bench. Birds called from the oak trees, their songs a stark contrast to the cruel laughter below. Leonard remained still, his weathered hands steady on his book, as the boys moved ever closer with their phones raised like weapons. Final chance for a voluntary interview, old-timer, Brett announced, his smile sharp as a knife. Our followers are waiting. Don't you want to be famous? The distance between Leonard and the boys had shrunk to almost nothing now. Their shadows fell across his pages, turning Maya Angelou's powerful words into darkness. The phone's camera eye stared unblinking, hungry for conflict, while three faces waited with varying degrees of anticipation and unease for what would happen next. Leonard kept his eyes forward, his dignity wrapped around him like armor, as the boys prepared their next move. The afternoon hung suspended between heartbeats, waiting to see which way violence would fall. Leonard's silence seemed to frustrate Brett, whose fake smile began to crack around the edges. Then, as if switching tactics, the teenager's expression smoothed into something almost professional. "Excuse me, sir?" Brett's voice changed completely, taking on a respectful tone that didn't match his eyes. "I'm actually working on a school project about local history. Would you mind answering a few questions?" Leonard glanced up briefly, measuring the situation. The phone was still recording, but Brett had stepped back slightly, playing at politeness. Mason and Cody flanked him, waiting. "It's for our social studies class," Mason added, catching on to Brett's game. "You know, about how things have changed in Pine Brook over the years." Leonard cleared his throat softly. "Young man, I've lived here long enough to know—" "Oh, wow! Listen to that accent," Brett interrupted, his fake respect crumbling instantly. "Pure Georgia cotton field, am I right? Say something else, Gramps. Our followers are gonna love this." Mason snickered, pulling out his own phone to record. "Yeah, give us some of that authentic plantation flavor." Cody shifted uncomfortably, looking anywhere but at Leonard. "Guys, maybe we shouldn't?" "Here, I'll help set the mood," Brett said, pulling an empty soda can from his pocket and tossing it at Leonard's feet. It clattered against the concrete, rolling under the bench. "There you go. Some authentic project decoration." More trash followed. A crumpled chip bag from Mason, a wadded-up paper wrapper that hit Leonard's shoe. The old man's fingers tightened slightly on his book, but his face remained calm. "Man, he's not even flinching," Mason complained. "Maybe he's used to sitting in garbage." Brett zoomed in closer with his phone. "Nah, he's just trying to act dignified. Right, Gramps? Pretending you're somebody important instead of just another—" "That's enough." Leonard's voice was quiet, but firm as he closed his book and reached for his cane. Mason's foot shot out, accidentally, knocking the cane away. It clattered across the sidewalk, rolling just out of reach. "Oops, my bad. Guess you'll have to shuffle over there and get it." "Stop it," Cody muttered, but he made no move to help. Leonard carefully set his book aside and started to stand, his movements deliberate and controlled. Brett immediately stepped in front of him, phone still raised. "Where you going, old-timer? The interview's just getting good." Brett's smile had turned predatory. "Tell us more about your fascinating life experience. What's it like being so historical?" "Let me pass." Leonard's voice remained steady, though his legs weren't as reliable without his cane. "Or what?" Brett challenged, moving closer. "You gonna call someone? Report us to the authorities?" He affected a mocking tone. "Help! Help! Some nice young men are trying to interview me." Mason's laughter echoed across the park. "Maybe he's got a whole gang of senior citizens ready to attack." "They'll beat us with their walkers!" Leonard stood as straight as he could, his dignity intact despite their taunts. "Young man, you're making us serious." The shove came without warning, Brett's hand shooting out and catching Leonard square in the chest. The old man stumbled backward, unable to catch his balance without his cane. He fell hard onto the bench and then slid to the ground, his hip striking the concrete with a dull thud. Mason's laughter turned high and wild. "Holy! Did you get that on camera?" "Every second," Brett confirmed, his phone still pointed at Leonard's fallen form. "This is gonna blow up online." The impact knocked the breath from Leonard's lungs. Pain shot through his hip and side as he hit the concrete, his glasses skittering away across the path. Through blurred vision, he could see the boys' shapes looming over him, their laughter echoing in his ears. "Look at him down there," Brett crowed, circling Leonard with his phone. "Not so dignified now, are you?" Leonard's hands scraped against the rough ground as he tried to push himself up. Every movement sent waves of pain through his body. His hip throbbed where it had struck the pavement, and his palms stung from breaking his fall. "Hold up! I got something special for our guest star," Mason announced, stepping away from the group. The sound of a zipper followed. Leonard managed to get to his knees, his breath coming in short gasps. Without his glasses, the world was a hazy mess of shapes and colors. He could feel the rough texture of the concrete beneath his palms, smell the fresh-cut grass from the nearby lawn, hear the rustle of leaves in the trees above. Everything seemed sharper, more intense, as if his other senses were trying to compensate for his compromised vision. "Watch this!" Mason called out. The sound of liquid hitting pavement came next, followed by more laughter. The stream of urine splashed near Leonard's feet, barely missing his shoes. "Oh man, that was perfect!" Brett zoomed in with his phone. "Give us a smile for the camera, Gramps. Show everyone how much fun you're having." Leonard's fingers found his glasses, thankfully unbroken. He carefully placed them back on his face, the world coming into focus again. The pain in his hip flared as he slowly pushed himself to his feet, using the bench for support. His clothes were dirty, his dignity wounded, but his face remained composed. A jogger approached on the path, slowing slightly as she took in the scene. Leonard met her eyes briefly, but she quickly looked away, picking up her pace as she passed. The sound of her footsteps faded rapidly into the distance. "Oh, looks like nobody wants to help the old man," Brett taunted, finally lowering his phone. "Guess they know better than to get involved." Mason zipped up his pants, still chuckling. "This is gonna be epic online. We should do a whole series. Messing with randoms in the park." "Whatever. I'm getting bored," Brett said, stretching lazily. "Let's go edit this masterpiece. We've got some followers to entertain." The boys started walking away, their voices carrying back across the park as they discussed filters and captions. Leonard stood alone, his breath steadying but his hands still shaking. His cane lay several feet away, and each step toward it sent sharp pains through his hip. Once he had retrieved his cane, Leonard gathered his fallen book and what remained of his dignity. The walk home felt longer than usual. each step a reminder of what had just happened. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk as he made his way through familiar streets that suddenly felt less welcoming. At home, Leonard eased himself into his favorite chair, wincing at the movement. Bruises were already forming on his hip and side. His clothes were dirty, marked with grass stains and concrete dust. But it was the weight in his chest that hurt the most, not just from the fall, but from the familiar bitter taste of humiliation and helplessness. Across town, in Brett's family's expansive home theater room, the three boys huddled around a laptop. Brett's fingers flew across the keyboard as he edited the video, adding effects and music. "Check this out," he said, playing back a segment where Leonard fell. He'd added slow motion and a cartoonish sound effect. Pure gold. Mason leaned in, grinning. "Add some text here. Something about teaching respect to the elderly." "How about this?" Brett typed quickly, then read aloud. "Teaching a history lesson to this old-timer. Maybe next time he'll remember his place." "Perfect." Mason high-fived him. "That's gonna get so many views." Cody sat slightly apart from the others, scrolling through his phone without really seeing it. He glanced up briefly as Brett hit the post button, then quickly looked away again. "And? Uploaded," Brett announced triumphantly. "Time to watch the likes roll in. Tomorrow at school, we're gonna be legends." The video began its journey through social media, spreading like a digital virus across screens and platforms. In their excitement, the boys never stopped to consider who might be watching, or what consequences their content might bring. The morning sun had barely risen when Angela Carter's phone erupted with notifications. Bleary-eyed, she reached for her device, expecting routine case updates. Instead, her screen filled with urgent messages and links to a viral video. "Oh my God," she whispered, sitting bolt upright in her bed. The footage was shaky, but there was no mistaking her father's face. She watched in horror as the scene unfolded, her hands trembling with rage. Angela's fingers flew across the phone's keypad, dialing her father's number. The line rang 4 times before his familiar voice answered, steady as always. "Good morning, Angela." "Daddy, I just saw the video. Are you hurt? I'm coming right now. Don't try to talk me out of it." "Angela, there's no need to—" "I'm already packing," she cut him off, wedging the phone between her ear and shoulder while throwing clothes into an overnight bag. "Those little monsters filmed themselves assaulting you. This is a hate crime, Daddy. We can have them arrested within the hour." Leonard's voice remained calm. "Take a breath, baby girl. I'm fine. Just some bruises." "Just some bruises?" Angela's voice cracked. "They pushed you down. That boy, he—" She couldn't bring herself to describe what she'd seen. "And people are sharing it like it's entertainment." In his kitchen in Pinebrook, Leonard sat at his breakfast table, reading glasses perched on his nose as he scrolled through the growing storm on his tablet. The video had racked up over 10,000 views overnight. The comments section was a battlefield. "LOL, old man got owned." "This is disgusting. Who raised these kids?" "Wait a minute. Is that Judge Carter?" "Someone needs to ID these punks." "The comments are starting to figure out who you are," Angela said, her car keys jingling in the background. "We need to get ahead of this. I'm calling a press conference." "Not yet," Leonard replied, his voice firm but gentle. "Let it play out a little longer." "Play out? Daddy, they're making memes out of your assault. This isn't a game." "No, it's not," Leonard agreed. "But timing is everything in both law and justice. Trust me on this." Angela's BMW roared to life. "I'll be there in 3 hours. Don't talk to any reporters before I arrive." After hanging up, Leonard moved carefully to his study. His hip protested with each step, but he refused to let the pain show, even in private. On his desk sat a framed photo from his final day on the federal bench, his black robes crisp and dignified. Beside it lay yesterday's paperback, still dusty from the fall. His phone buzzed again. Local news stations were calling. The story was spreading faster than even he had anticipated. In Brett's house across town, the mood shifted from triumph to unease. His mother stood in his doorway, face pale, holding up her phone. "Brett, what did you do? There are people online saying this man is a federal judge." "What? No way," Brett scoffed, but his stomach tightened. He was just some random old guy. They're making stuff up. His mother's hand shook. "The country club just called. They're reviewing our membership. Your father is furious." At Mason's house, similar scenes played out. His father, the bank manager, stared at his computer screen in horror as email after email arrived from concerned board members. The video had been shared in their private group. Cody sat alone in his room, reading through the comments with growing dread. He'd known it was wrong, had felt it in his gut, but he'd said nothing, done nothing. Now his silence felt like guilt. Back in Leonard's study, his doorbell rang. Through the window, he could see the first news van parking across the street. More would follow. His phone buzzed again, a text from Angela. "Almost there. Don't go outside." Leonard smiled slightly, remembering how protective she'd always been, even as a little girl. He'd taught her to fight injustice with intelligence rather than anger, though she still struggled with that balance. Just like her mother. The local news station cut into regular programming with a breaking update. The anchor's voice carried an edge of excitement. "Our top story this morning. A disturbing video gone viral shows 3 unidentified teenagers harassing and assaulting an elderly black man in Pine Brook Park. But this story takes an unexpected turn. Sources are now claiming the victim is none other than retired federal judge Leonard M. Carter, known for his landmark civil rights decisions in the 1980s and 90s. The screen split to show clips from the viral video alongside an official portrait of Leonard in his judicial robes. The contrast was stark, the dignified judge versus the vulnerable man on the ground. Judge Carter's office has not yet responded to requests for comment, the anchor continued. The question on everyone's mind: is this elderly man actually a retired federal judge? And if so, what consequences await his young attackers? We'll continue following this developing story. Leonard muted the television and glanced at his watch. Angela would arrive soon, ready for battle. The news vans outside had multiplied. His phone kept buzzing with calls from reporters, old colleagues, and community leaders. He thought about the boys, wondering if they'd realized yet what they'd done. Not just to him, but to themselves. Their faces hadn't been clear in the video, but in a town like Pine Brook, identities rarely stayed secret for long. The sound of tires on gravel announced another arrival. Through his window, Leonard watched his daughter's car pull into the driveway, parking behind his sensible sedan. Angela emerged like a storm front, designer briefcase in one hand, phone in the other, already talking rapidly to someone. Leonard straightened his collar and smoothed his shirt. There would be time later for anger, for justice, for consequences, but first, he needed to calm the tempest. That was his daughter. She had always been his strength, but sometimes strength needed guidance to find its most effective path. The front door opened. "Daddy?" Angela's voice carried through the house, tight with concern and barely contained fury. "In here, baby girl," he called back, settling into his leather chair. "Let's talk about how we're going to handle this." By noon, Pine Brook had transformed. News vans lined the quiet street outside Leonard's house, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal sunflowers. Reporters clutched microphones and checked their makeup in hand mirrors, waiting for any movement behind the judge's curtained windows. Inside, Angela paced the living room while Leonard sat calmly in his favorite armchair, watching the circus grow outside. "The video's everywhere," Angela reported, scrolling through her phone. "Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. The boys' parents are trying to get it taken down, but it's too late. People are already making copies." Leonard nodded. "And the boys?" "Identified within hours. Brett Thompson, his father's on the school board. Mason Richards, family owns half the real estate downtown. And Cody Wilson, his mother runs the bank." Angela's lip curled. "Pillars of the community." A knock at the door made them both turn. Angela's law partner, Marcus, entered with an armful of files and a grim expression. "Judge Carter," he said, nodding respectfully. "We've got the press conference set up at the courthouse steps in an hour. The national networks are picking up the story." Leonard stood carefully, hiding his wince. "Then we shouldn't keep them waiting." "Daddy, you don't have to do this today," Angela protested. "You're hurt." "I'm fine," Leonard said firmly. "Marcus, did you bring what I asked for?" Marcus produced a garment bag. Inside was a simple, well-worn navy suit. Not Leonard's best, but one that carried dignity without flash. Across town, the Thompson house was in chaos. Brett's father shouted into his phone while his mother refreshed social media pages obsessively, watching their family name trend for all the wrong reasons. "I don't care what it costs," Mr. Thompson yelled. "Get that video offline and call the station. Tell them if they run this story, they can forget about their school board advertising budget." But his threats fell on deaf ears. The story had grown beyond local control. At the Richards house, Mason sat white-faced on his bed as his father read comments from the country club's private message board. Longtime family friends were suddenly disgusted and appalled. Their carefully cultivated social status was crumbling with each share and retweet. Cody Wilson hadn't stopped throwing up since his mother showed him the morning news. His college acceptance letters, proudly displayed on his desk, seemed to mock him now. At exactly 1 o'clock, Leonard emerged from his front door. Camera shutters clicked rapidly as he made his way to his car, Angela protective at his side. He moved slowly, but purposefully, using his cane with quiet dignity. The courthouse steps were packed. Local reporters who'd covered Leonard's cases years ago stood alongside national correspondents rushed in from Atlanta. The crowd fell silent as Leonard approached the podium, Angela and Marcus flanking him like guards. Leonard adjusted his reading glasses and looked out at the sea of faces. Some he recognized: parents from the country club, teachers from the high school, people who'd never quite met his eye at the grocery store. Now, they couldn't look away. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed crowd. "Yesterday, I was assaulted in Pinebrook Park by 3 young men who saw an old black man as nothing more than entertainment. They filmed their attack, proud of their cruelty, certain of their immunity." He paused, letting the words sink in. "To these young men, I say, I forgive you." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Angela's hands tightened on her briefcase. But forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. It does not erase consequences. Leonard's voice grew stronger. "Today, I am announcing my intention to file a civil lawsuit. Not against these boys. They are symptoms of a deeper disease. No, I am suing their parents, the Pinebrook School District, and the local government for fostering an environment where such entitled hatred could flourish." Gasps and whispers erupted. In the front row, the school superintendent dabbed at his forehead with a handkerchief. "For 40 years, I served on the federal bench. I saw how injustice hides behind politeness, how racism wears a suit and tie. These boys didn't learn their behavior in a vacuum." Camera lights flashed as Leonard leaned forward slightly. "To those who would use my pain as a viral moment, who would turn this assault into clickbait, or a cautionary tale. I am not your symbol. I am not your trending topic. I am a man who has spent his life fighting for justice, and I am not finished yet." He straightened to his full height, and for a moment, everyone saw not the victim from the video, but the federal judge who had stared down segregationists and corrupt officials for decades. "They thought I was powerless," Leonard said quietly, his words cutting through the silence. That was their first mistake. The oak-paneled study in Harold Halston's mansion felt smaller than usual, as three of Pinebrook's most influential parents paced and argued. Evening shadows crept across Persian rugs, while ice clinked nervously in crystal tumblers. "Your son was the ringleader, Harold," Mason's mother, Sarah Richards, snapped, her designer blazer wrinkled from hours of stress. "Brett's always pushing the others into trouble." Harold's face reddened. "My son? Your precious Mason is the one who—" He stopped himself, taking a long drink instead. Cody's father, Tom Wilson, sat slumped in a leather armchair, his tie loosened. "Does it matter who did what? We're all in this mess now." "It matters," Sarah insisted, "because some of us have more to lose. The Richards name means something in this town." Harold laughed bitterly. "And the Halston name doesn't? I've got 3 development projects hanging by a thread. The investors are already calling." "At least you have projects," Tom muttered. "The bank board's meeting tomorrow. They're talking about new leadership." He rubbed his temples. "My son was supposed to start college in the fall." "They can't touch us," Harold declared, but his voice wavered. "We run this town." Sarah stopped pacing. "We used to run this town, but this isn't just local anymore. Have you seen Twitter? CNN? Then we control the narrative," Harold said firmly. "We have connections. We can spin this." "Spin what?" Tom exploded. "There's video. Our kids attacked a federal judge." "Former federal judge," Harold corrected. "And he was dressed like a homeless man. How were they supposed to know?" Sarah's perfectly manicured nails drummed against her glass. "We need to get ahead of this. Issue a joint statement. Something about youthful mistakes, unfortunate misunderstandings." "And the lawsuit?" Tom asked. Harold waved dismissively. "Empty threat. He knows we have the best lawyers in Georgia." "Had the best lawyers," Sarah corrected. 3 firms already turned me down today. Said they don't want the exposure." Silence fell as that reality sank in. Across town, Leonard's modest home hummed with purposeful energy. Angela had transformed the dining room into a war room, with laptops, legal pads, and document boxes covering every surface. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from civil rights attorneys nationwide offering support. Leonard sat at the head of the table, examining old newspaper clippings. "The pattern goes back decades," he said quietly. "Segregated country club memberships, selective zoning laws, school district gerrymandering." Angela nodded, typing furiously. Harold Halston's father led the fight against integration in '65. Like father, like son. "And grandson," Leonard added softly. A gentle knock interrupted them. Pastor Elijah Briggs entered, carrying a covered dish. "Sister Mary's famous chicken casserole," he announced. "She says you need to keep your strength up." Leonard smiled warmly. "Join us, old friend?" The pastor pulled up a chair, his kind face turning serious. "The whole congregation's behind you, Leonard." "But—" He hesitated. "But?" Angela prompted. "These men you're going after, they're dangerous when cornered. Harold Halston especially. Remember what happened to that environmental group that opposed his lake development?" Leonard nodded grimly. "Mysterious audit. Office break-in. Never solved. They won't back down quietly," Pastor Briggs warned. "They've got too much to lose." "So do we," Angela said fiercely. "Every kid who's been bullied, every family pushed out by their urban renewal projects, every student denied opportunities. They're all counting on us now. Leonard reached for his daughter's hand. We've faced worse. And won, Angela added, squeezing back. The pastor smiled. The Lord works in mysterious ways. Those boys thought they were filming your shame. Instead, they exposed their own. A knock at the door made them all turn. Angela's law partner Marcus entered, holding a small package. This just came by courier, he said. No return address. Angela took the package carefully. Inside was a single flash drive, unmarked except for a sticky note reading, Truth. She glanced at her father, who nodded. With steady hands, she plugged it into her laptop. Angela's hand trembled slightly as she opened the video file. The grainy footage showed a packed community center from decades ago. The date stamp read, March 15, 1990. Wooden chairs filled with residents faced a raised platform where town officials sat behind a long table. A younger Harold Halston stood at the microphone, his dark hair free of gray, but his commanding presence unchanged. Integration is a mistake, he declared, his voice sharp with conviction. Our children deserve better than social experiments. Pinebrook Academy has traditions, standards. Standards, a voice called out. You mean white standards? The camera panned to show a younger Leonard Carter rising from his seat, tall and dignified in his judge's suit. Mr. Halston, would you explain what these standards are exactly? Harold's face tightened. This isn't about race, Your Honor. It's about maintaining educational excellence. Excellence? Leonard's voice was calm but cutting. Like when your father's school board burned down the colored library in '65? Was that excellence? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Harold gripped the microphone. That's ancient history. We're talking about today. Today, Leonard repeated. When black students with perfect grades can't get into Pinebrook Academy, but white students with C averages are welcomed with open arms. The present-day Leonard watched the screen intently, while Angela scribbled notes. Dad, this is gold, she whispered. But there's more. The video continued, showing other prominent townspeople speaking against integration. Tom Wilson's father comparing it to invasion. Sarah Richards's mother suggesting separate but equal facilities. Pastor Briggs leaned forward. I remember that meeting. Next day, someone broke all the windows in your office. Never did find out who, Leonard said quietly. Angela clicked through more files. There's dozens of videos here. Board meetings, private functions. She paused on one showing Brett's grandfather at a country club dinner. Listen to this. The elderly Halston raised a glass. To Pinebrook, where we know how to keep things orderly. Knowing laughter rippled through the well-dressed crowd. The same families, Marcus observed, generation after generation. Leonard stood slowly, using his cane. We need to talk to people. Get their stories. Already on it, Angela said, picking up her phone. I've got 5 interviews set up for tomorrow. The next few days became a blur of testimonies. They set up in the church basement, where people felt safe to speak. A steady stream of residents came forward, each with their own piece of the puzzle. Mrs. Jenkins, a retired teacher's aide, spoke first. My son Marcus, straight A's, perfect attendance. Applied for the Pinebrook Merit Scholarship in '95. They gave it to Brett Halston's cousin instead. She had a C average. Did you protest? Angela asked gently. Tried to. Next week, my husband's garage got audited. Lost his business license over a paperwork error. More stories followed. James Turner, former high school quarterback. Fight broke out at a game. White kids started it, but only black players got suspended. Harold Halston was on the school board then. Sarah Chen, local reporter, tried to investigate discriminatory lending at Wilson's bank. Story got killed. Editor said advertisers have concerns. Leonard listened to each testimony, his expression grave but unsurprised. During a break, he confided to Angela, "This was always happening. People were just too afraid to speak up." "Not anymore," she replied, showing him her phone. The local news had picked up the story. Comments flooded in from former residents sharing similar experiences. By evening, Leonard's dining room table disappeared under stacks of statements, documents, and photos. Marcus organized them by decade, revealing a clear pattern of systematic discrimination. "Look at the zoning changes," he pointed out. "Every time a black family moved into a nice neighborhood, suddenly there's a new development project," Angela finished, "forcing them out through eminent domain." Pastor Briggs brought coffee and stayed to help. "Remember when they built that shopping center on Oak Street? Displaced 15 families. All black homeowners. Harold Halston's first major project," Leonard noted. The evidence mounted. School disciplinary records showed black students receiving harsher punishments for identical infractions. Housing loans were denied at higher rates in certain neighborhoods. Security footage showed different treatment at local businesses. "They built a whole system," Angela said, frustrated. "Each piece supporting the others." Leonard nodded. "And now we have proof." Late that night, after the others had gone, Leonard sat alone at his desk. The flash drive felt small in his weathered hands, such a tiny thing to hold so much truth. He placed it carefully in a fresh folder, writing "Evidence" in his precise handwriting. The folder contained more than just videos now. It held decades of pain, fear, and silence, but also hope. Each testimony was a crack in the wall of power that had seemed unbreakable for so long. He opened his desk drawer and placed the folder inside, aligning it perfectly with the others. Everything in its place, organized and ready, just as he'd done throughout his career on the bench, preparing to deliver justice. The town hall's wooden benches creaked under the weight of hundreds of residents. Camera crews lined the back wall, their red lights blinking in the stuffy air. At the podium, Leonard Carter stood straight despite his cane, his voice clear and measured. "This isn't about me," he began, adjusting his reading glasses. "This isn't about one afternoon in the park, or 3 boys who made a terrible choice." He paused, looking directly at Brett, Mason, and Cody, seated with their families in the front row. "This is about all the voices that were never heard." Harold Halston shifted in his seat, whispering to his lawyer. Mason's mother dabbed at her face with a tissue, trying to look appropriately concerned for the cameras. Leonard lifted a manila folder. In 1965, Mary Washington tried to enroll her daughter in Pine Brook Academy. Perfect grades, tested in the top percentile. He produced a yellowed document. Her application was denied due to space limitations. That same week, 3 white students with lower scores were admitted. "That's ancient history," Harold called out. "Things have changed." "Have they?" Leonard pressed a button on the podium. An email appeared on the large screen behind him, dated just last year. "This is from the current admissions board, which you chair, Mr. Halston. Quote, we need to maintain certain standards. Some families just don't fit the Pine Brook profile." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Harold's face reddened. "Mrs. Ruby Jenkins, please stand." An elderly black woman rose slowly from her seat. "Tell them what happened to your grandson last spring." Ruby's voice quavered, but grew stronger as she spoke. "Tommy had straight A's since kindergarten. Applied for the Merit Scholarship. They gave it to a white student with lower grades. When I complained," she took a deep breath, "my other grandson got suspended the next week, said he was disruptive in class." Mason's mother stood up. "This is ridiculous. You can't blame us for every—" "Sarah Richards," Leonard continued calmly. "Please share your experience." A middle-aged black woman in a teacher's uniform stood. "I taught at Pine Brook Elementary for 15 years. Reported racial bullying 6 times. Each time, the incidents were marked unsubstantiated. Last year, I found racist graffiti in the boys' bathroom. When I reported it, she gestured to the crowd. I was transferred to janitorial staff. Brett's father jumped up. This is a witch hunt. You're trying to destroy our reputations over one stupid incident. No, Mr. Halston. I'm showing a pattern. Leonard produced more documents. Here are 37 similar complaints from the past 5 years, all dismissed, all followed by mysterious consequences for the complainants. The crowd's mood was shifting. People who had entered supporting the prominent families now whispered among themselves, shaking their heads. Leonard's voice remained steady. James Turner, your story, please. A muscular man in his 30s stood. I was quarterback in '08. White players started a fight, but only black players got suspended. Lost my scholarship chances. Mr. Halston was on the school board then. Lies! Harold shouted. You can't prove. Actually, Leonard pressed another button. Security footage played, clearly showing white players throwing the first punches. The tape was lost at the time. Fortunately, someone kept a copy. More witnesses stood. A former bank teller described racial coding on loan applications. A maintenance worker recalled being fired for eating lunch in the wrong break room. A nurse spoke about separate waiting rooms that somehow still existed in 2020. Through it all, Leonard kept his composure, but his eyes blazed with decades of accumulated truth. Each testimony landed like a hammer blow against the wall of denial the families had built. Cody Fields, the youngest of the 3 boys, couldn't stop his tears. He stared at his shoes, shoulders shaking slightly, as each new voice added to the weight of what they'd done, not just to Leonard, but to an entire community. My father, Leonard said softly, drawing everyone's attention, worked as a janitor in this very building. Every night, he cleaned the offices of men who called him boy to his face. He died, never seeing justice. But he taught me something precious. He gripped his cane tighter. He said, Son, truth doesn't expire. It just waits for its moment. The room fell silent. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Harold tried one last time. We've apologized. The boys made a mistake. What more do you want? What do I want? Leonard's voice filled the chamber. I want the truth to be heard. I want every child in Pinebrook to have a fair chance. I want the system you and your fathers built to finally face judgment. He looked at each family in turn. You didn't just attack an old man in the park. You attacked hope itself. You attacked every person who ever dreamed of better. And now, he gestured to the crowded room, to the witnesses, to the damning evidence displayed behind him. Now, they're all here to speak. Angela leaned close to her father's ear, a smile of fierce pride on her face. They're losing the room, she whispered. Later that night, smoke filled the air, thick and choking. Orange flames licked the sky from Leonard's backyard shed as fire trucks wailed in the distance. Angela paced the driveway, phone pressed to her ear, her free hand clenched in a tight fist. This was not an accident, she snapped into the phone. I want officers here now. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Now. Leonard stood quietly on his back porch, watching firefighters battle the blaze. His expression remained neutral, but his grip on his cane tightened as decades of family photos and legal documents burned. The heat pressed against his face like an unwelcome memory. Officer Pete Jenkins sauntered up, notepad in hand. Probably just an electrical issue, Judge Carter. These old sheds, you know how they are. The shed had no electricity, Angela cut in, ending her call. No wiring, no power. Try again. Jenkins shrugged. Could have been kids playing with fireworks. At midnight. In our backyard. Angela's voice rose. After what happened at the hearing today? "Now, Miss Carter," Jenkins drawled, "let's not jump to conclusions. We'll file a report." "File a report?" Angela stepped closer. "Someone tried to burn down my father's property, and you're treating it like a missing cat." Leonard placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Angela." "No, Daddy. I'm tired of this." She shrugged off his touch. "They humiliate you, assault you, and now this? And the police won't even—" "Angela." His voice was firmer this time. "Let them write their report." The fire crew finally extinguished the last flames, leaving behind a charred skeleton of wooden beams and melted metal. The acrid smell of burned paper hung in the air like an accusation. Inside the house, Leonard made tea while Angela called their security company. "I want cameras installed tomorrow," she insisted. "Every angle, night vision, motion sensors, the works." "Already done," Leonard said quietly, sliding her a steaming cup. "After the park incident," Angela paused, "you knew something like this might happen?" "I've lived a long time, baby girl." He settled into his favorite armchair. "This isn't my first fight." Her phone buzzed. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." She turned it to show him Brett Halston's face filling the screen, his eyes red and puffy. "I want to apologize," Brett's rehearsed voice quavered. "What happened in the park was just a prank that went too far. We never meant to hurt anyone. I'm not racist. Some of my best friends are—" "Turn it off," Leonard said softly. "No, watch this garbage." Angela's fingers tightened around her phone. "His daddy probably hired a PR firm," Brett continued, dabbing at his eyes. "Judge Carter, sir, if you're watching this, I'm so sorry. We were just being stupid kids. Please don't destroy our families over one mistake." Comments flooded in beneath the video. "Fake tears!" "Notice he's sorry. Now that he knows who he attacked." "Best friends or what?" "Finish that sentence, Brett." "Rich boy scared of consequences." Angela's phone kept buzzing with notifications. "It's everywhere. People are furious." She looked up at her father. "This could help our case." "It already has." Leonard sipped his tea. "Their true nature shows clearest when they're desperate." A knock at the door made them both tense. Angela checked the security camera feed on her phone before opening it. A courier stood outside, holding an overnight envelope. "Special delivery for Judge Leonard Carter," the young man said, handing over the package. Leonard opened it carefully, unfolding a letter on heavy Senate stationery. His eyes moved across the page, and for the first time that night, he smiled. "What is it?" Angela asked. "Remember Marcus Thompson? The boy you mentored? The one who—" Her eyes widened. "Senator Thompson?" Leonard nodded. "He's calling for a federal investigation into discriminatory practices in Pine Brook's educational system." He passed her the letter. "And he's offering his full support for our case." Angela scanned the page, her expression shifting from worry to fierce satisfaction. "This changes everything." "No," Leonard said, setting down his tea. "This just confirms what we already knew." He looked out the window at his ruined shed, its blackened frame stark against the night sky. "When you stand for truth, you never stand alone." Angela started to respond, but her phone buzzed again. Another notification about Brett's video, now viral for all the wrong reasons. His tearful apology had become a symbol of privilege deflection, spawning memes and angry commentary across social media. "They really thought this would help them," she marveled, scrolling through responses. "They thought if they just cried on camera and said sorry." "They thought what they've always thought," Leonard said, "that rules are for other people, that consequences are for other people." He picked up Senator Thompson's letter again. "They forgot that some of those other people grow up to write laws." The night settled around them, broken only by the occasional camera flash, as crime scene technicians documented the shed's remains. Angela made more calls, coordinated with their legal team, and arranged for additional security measures. Through it all, Leonard sat quietly, reading and rereading the senator's letter. "Daddy," Angela said finally, "are you really okay?" He looked up at his daughter, at the worry lines creasing her forehead, at the fierce protectiveness in her stance. "I'm more than okay," he said. "I'm ready." "For what?" "For tomorrow." He folded the letter carefully. "And all the tomorrows after that, until justice isn't just a word in Pine Brook, it's a reality." Outside, Officer Jenkins's cruiser finally pulled away, its taillights disappearing into the darkness. The shed's skeleton stood as a silent witness, its charred beams reaching toward the stars like blackened fingers. But inside, father and daughter sat together, their determination unburned, their purpose unshaken, waiting for dawn. Leonard sat at his desk early one morning, fingers hovering over his laptop keyboard. The Washington Post's submission page glowed on the screen. He took a deep breath and began to type. "To the boys who pushed me down. A letter about standing up." The words flowed steadily, each sentence carefully chosen. "Dear Brett, Mason, and Cody, when you saw me that Saturday afternoon, you thought you knew exactly who I was. An old black man on a park bench, reading a worn paperback. Easy target. Someone whose dignity you could steal without consequence. Someone whose pain would make you feel powerful. You were wrong about who I am, but I know exactly who you are, because I've seen your kind of cruelty before. I've watched it hide behind fake tears and hollow apologies. I've seen it pass from father to son like a poisoned inheritance. But this letter isn't about anger. It's about choice. Every day, we choose who we become. When you filmed me, pushed me down, and mocked my pain, you chose to become the kind of people who hurt others for entertainment. When your classmates shared that video, laughing along, they chose to become accomplices to cruelty. When adults in your lives saw the video and stayed silent, they chose to become part of the problem. But here's what you don't understand. Every morning, we get to choose again. I've spent my life making choices. As a judge, I chose to defend the rights of people who looked like me, even when it cost me friendships and threatened my career. As a black man in the South, I chose to hold my head high, even when others tried to force it down. As your victim, I chose not to let your actions define me. Now, it's your turn to choose. You can choose to hide behind lawyers and PR statements. You can choose to keep believing that your privilege will protect you from consequences. You can choose to remain the boys who thought it was funny to humiliate an elderly man. Or you can choose to change. To those watching from the sidelines, your silence is also a choice. When you scroll past injustice, when you laugh at cruelty, when you pretend not to see, you're choosing who you are. Choose better. I'm establishing the Carter Fellowship for Justice, dedicated to training young lawyers to fight discrimination and defend civil rights. Because while you tried to knock me down, I choose to lift others up. The park bench where you found me? I still sit there, reading my books. I choose not to let fear win. I choose to show other elderly people, other Black Americans, that we don't have to hide. We don't have to accept cruelty as normal. Your video showed the world who you are. This letter shows them who I am. And tomorrow, all of us get to choose again. Sincerely, Leonard M. Carter, retired, federal judge. Leonard hit send and sat back, exhaling slowly. Angela appeared in the doorway, coffee cup in hand. "It's done?" she asked. He nodded. "It's done." Within hours, the letter went viral. Free T-shirt, Choose Better, and Judge Carter trended nationwide. News channels featured excerpts. Celebrities shared it. Comments poured in. This is how you respond to hate, with dignity and strength. Judge Carter just schooled an entire generation. Everyone needs to read this. Twice. Donations flooded the Carter Fellowship website. Law firms pledged matching funds. Civil rights organizations offered partnerships. Leonard's phone buzzed constantly with messages of support. 3 days after the letter's publication, a quiet knock came at Leonard's front door. Angela answered it, surprised to find Cody Fields standing there alone, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Is Judge Carter here?" His voice trembled. "Why?" Angela's tone was ice. "I need to talk to him. Please." Leonard appeared behind his daughter. "Let him in, Angela." They sat in Leonard's study, Cody perched nervously on the edge of his chair. His eyes kept darting to the framed copy of the Washington Post letter on the wall. "I read it," Cody said finally. "Your letter. I've read it maybe 20 times. Leonard waited, watching the boy's hands twist in his lap. "You're right about the choices," Cody continued. "I knew it was wrong. When Brett started filming, when Mason..." He swallowed hard. "I chose to go along. I chose wrong." "Yes," Leonard said quietly. "You did. I want to testify." The words rushed out. About everything. The video, the bullying before that, the stuff our parents say at home. Brett's dad calling people those names. Mason's mom blocking black kids from advanced classes. All of it. Angela leaned forward. "You understand what that means? Your friends. They're not my friends." Cody's voice cracked. "Friends don't make you hurt people to belong." Leonard studied the boy's face, seeing past the fear to something genuine underneath. "I can't take it back," Cody said. "What we did to you. But I can tell the truth. Maybe." He looked at the letter again. "Maybe that's how I start choosing better." Leonard rose slowly from his chair and crossed to where Cody sat. The boy tensed, but didn't move. Gently, Leonard placed a hand on Cody's shoulder. "You still have time to become a better man." The courthouse steps were crowded as Leonard and Angela made their way inside. News vans lined the street, and protesters held signs both supporting and opposing the case. Judge Elise McAllister's courtroom was already packed when they entered. Harold Halston sat with his expensive legal team, his face a mask of practiced concern. Mason's mother gripped her designer purse so tightly her knuckles were white. The boys weren't present. Their parents had insisted they be protected from the media circus. Angela arranged her files methodically at the plaintiff's table. Leonard watched her hands shake slightly as she sorted papers. "You ready?" he whispered. She nodded, squeezing his hand under the table. Judge McAllister entered, her silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Court is now in session. Carter versus Halston et al. Civil case number 2023 CV 4789. The proceedings began with opening statements. The defense painted a picture of youthful mistakes and overblown reactions. They showed carefully selected character witnesses praising the family's community involvement. Harold's lawyer emphasized his client's charitable donations. Then it was Angela's turn. She stood slowly, straightening her jacket. "Your Honor, this case isn't about one incident in a park. It's about decades of systematic discrimination, carefully hidden behind country club memberships and political donations." She gestured to the boxes of evidence beside her. "We have hundreds of documents showing a pattern of racial bias in school disciplinary actions. Testimony from dozens of families whose children were unfairly targeted. Emails between Mrs. Beecham and other school board members discussing ways to keep certain students, and, I quote, in their place." The courtroom tensed as Angela methodically laid out their case. Text messages between the boys bragging about other attacks. Security footage of similar incidents swept under the rug. Financial records showing Harold's companies systematically denying loans to black business owners. Then, Leonard took the stand. He moved carefully to the witness box, using his cane. The room fell silent as he settled into the chair. His voice, when it came, was steady and clear. "I've sat where you're sitting, Judge McAllister. For 40 years, I watched people try to hide their prejudice behind procedure. I learned to recognize the difference between genuine remorse and damage control." He turned slightly, addressing the whole courtroom. "These families aren't sorry for what happened. They're sorry they got caught. They're sorry their carefully maintained system of privilege is being exposed. They're sorry their children's actions finally forced us to look at what's really happening in Pinebrook." Harold's lawyer stood to object, but Leonard continued, his words gathering force like a quiet storm. "I didn't bring this case for revenge. I brought it because sometimes justice needs a witness. Sometimes we need to shine a light into dark corners and name what we see. These families taught their children that some people matter less than others. That cruelty is acceptable if you're powerful enough. That money can erase consequences." He lifted a document from the evidence box. "This is a memo from 1990, written by Mr. Halston, opposing school integration. He wrote, and I quote, 'Some changes are too expensive for our community to bear.'" Leonard set the paper down carefully. He was right about one thing. Change is expensive, but refusing to change costs even more. The defense tried to discredit Leonard's testimony, but his reputation was unassailable. Every attack only highlighted their desperation. Judge McAllister watched it all with sharp eyes, taking careful notes. After 3 days of testimony, the judge called a recess to consider her ruling. The wait lasted 2 hours. When Judge McAllister returned, her face was grave. "I've reviewed all evidence and testimony presented. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Harold's face turned red. Mason's mother began to cry. "The defendants will pay damages in the amount of $5 million to be used for establishing the Carter Fellowship for Justice. Furthermore, this court orders the immediate removal of Mrs. Beecham from the school board. The 3 minors involved are to be expelled from Pinebrook Academy, effective immediately." She turned to Harold. "Mr. Halston, given the evidence of discriminatory lending practices, this court is forwarding all relevant documents to federal banking regulators for further investigation." Harold stood abruptly, bumping the table. His lawyer grabbed his arm, whispering urgently. Harold yanked free and stormed out of the courtroom. Judge McAllister continued, "This court also orders the creation of an independent oversight committee to review all disciplinary actions and advanced placement decisions in Pinebrook schools for the next 5 years." She removed her glasses, looking directly at Leonard. "Judge Carter, your dignity in the face of cruelty has exposed long-hidden wrongs in this community. This court thanks you for your service, both on and off the bench." Court is adjourned. The room erupted in chaos. Reporters rushed for the doors, phones already dialing. Mason's mother collapsed into her chair. Angela hugged her father tightly, tears streaming down her face. Leonard stood slowly, gathering his cane. Angela tried to help him, but he shook his head gently. "I can manage." They walked together through the courthouse doors into a sea of flashing cameras and shouted questions. "Judge Carter, how do you feel about the verdict? What message do you have for the families? Will you be expanding the fellowship nationwide?" Leonard didn't stop. He didn't smile for cameras or pause for statements. He simply kept walking, head high, each step measured and dignified, leaving the chaos behind him. The reporters followed for half a block before realizing Judge Leonard Carter had already said everything that needed saying. A week after the verdict, Brett Halston sat frozen at his desk, staring at his laptop screen. The email from Stanford University was polite but firm. "Dear Mr. Halston, In light of recent events and new information regarding your conduct, we regret to inform you that your admission to Stanford University has been rescinded. His hands trembled as he scrolled through similar messages from his backup schools. Yale, Princeton, Duke, all gone. The carefully constructed future his father had bought and paid for was crumbling. Downstairs, he could hear his father shouting into the phone about lawyers and appeals. His mother hadn't left her room in days. The house felt like a tomb. Across town, Cody Fields walked into the Pinebrook Community Center, his shoulders tense. A dozen teenagers sat in a circle, most of them Black or Hispanic. Ms. Thompson, the program coordinator, smiled warmly. "Welcome to Bridges," she said. "We're glad you chose to join us." Cody took an empty seat, feeling every eye on him. They all knew who he was, what he'd done, but no one said anything about it. "Today, we're talking about impact versus intent," Ms. Thompson continued. "Who wants to start?" A girl raised her hand. "Sometimes people say they didn't mean to hurt anyone, but that doesn't fix what they broke." Cody's throat tightened. He thought about Leonard Carter's face that day in the park, about how long it took him to finally speak up. "Would you like to share anything, Cody?" Ms. Thompson asked gently. He nodded slowly. I used to think staying quiet when bad things happened meant I wasn't responsible. But now I know that's not true." The room was silent for a moment. Then another boy spoke up. "At least you learned. Some people never do." At Pinebrook General Hospital, Mason Beecham lay in a narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. The anxiety attack had hit during dinner, his heart racing, chest tight, world spinning. His mother found him curled up in the bathroom, hyperventilating. The doctor had explained it clinically, acute stress response, likely triggered by recent trauma. But Mason knew the real reason. Everything was falling apart. His friends wouldn't talk to him. College applications were due, but his transcript now carried a giant red flag. His mother barely looked at him anymore. A nurse came in to check his vitals. "Try to rest," she said kindly. Mason noticed her name tag read Carter and wondered if she was related to the judge. He was too ashamed to ask. Downtown, Leonard Carter stood before the newly unveiled mural on the community center wall. It stretched 3 stories high, painted in vibrant colors that seemed to glow in the afternoon sun. The artists, students from local high schools, had worked for weeks after the verdict. The mural showed a timeline of Black excellence in Pinebrook. A freed slave who built the first Black-owned business in 1866. The first Black teacher hired in 1947. Civil rights protesters from the 1960s. Recent graduates headed to top universities. And there, near the center, was Leonard's face. The artists had captured his quiet dignity, the strength in his eyes. Below his portrait were the words he'd spoken in court. "Justice needs a witness." People passed by, some stopping to take pictures or point out faces they recognized. Leonard stood silent, leaning slightly on his cane. He studied each face in the mural, remembering their stories, their struggles, their triumphs. Angela joined him, slipping her arm through his. "The kids did a beautiful job," she said softly. Leonard nodded. "They did." He touched the rough brick wall gently. "They understand something important. History isn't just about the past. It's about who we choose to become." They stood together for a while longer, watching the changing light paint new shadows across the faces of their ancestors and neighbors. Finally, Leonard said it was time to head home. The walk was slow but steady, his cane tapping a gentle rhythm on the sidewalk. As they turned onto his street, he stopped. A group of children stood in his front yard, holding a large handmade sign. The letters were wobbly but clear. "Thank you, Judge Carter." Their parents stood back by the fence, smiling nervously. Leonard stood before the freshly painted walls of his rebuilt shed, now transformed into a modest classroom. New bookshelves lined the walls, filled with legal texts and civil rights histories. Folding chairs formed neat rows on the polished wooden floor. The air smelled of fresh paint and possibility. "Are you sure about this, Dad?" Angela asked, arranging handouts on a small desk. "Teaching isn't exactly restful." Leonard adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. "Neither is sitting idle while there's work to be done." The first workshop was scheduled for that afternoon. Leonard had expected maybe 5 or 6 people. But as families began arriving, the shed quickly filled beyond capacity. Parents and teenagers sat shoulder to shoulder. Some brought notebooks. Others just listened intently. "The law isn't just words on paper," Leonard began, his voice soft but carrying to every corner. "It's a living thing. It grows or withers based on how we tend to it." He held up a worn copy of the Constitution. This document was written by men who owned slaves, but it was also used to free them. The same words, different hands. A teenage girl raised her hand. "But how do we know which interpretation is right?" Leonard smiled. "That's exactly the kind of question we're here to explore." Over the next 2 hours, Leonard guided them through landmark civil rights cases. He explained complex legal concepts in simple terms, connecting each ruling to everyday life. The teenagers especially seemed captivated by his stories from the bench, the real human dramas behind the formal language of the law. Angela watched from the back, taking notes. Her father had always been a gifted teacher, though he rarely got to show it in court. Here, in this humble space, his wisdom could flow freely. Word spread quickly. The next week, they had to add more chairs, then more sessions. Local teachers began showing up, asking for materials they could use in their classrooms. "We need a real curriculum," Angela said one evening, spreading papers across Leonard's kitchen table. "Something other schools could use too." Leonard nodded thoughtfully. "Start with my old case notes. There's 30 years of teaching material there." They worked late into the night, organizing Leonard's writings into lesson plans. Angela added modern examples, discussion questions, role-playing exercises. They called it the Carter Method, teaching civil rights through living history. The school board, newly reconstructed after the lawsuit, expressed interest. Other districts started calling. Angela hired 2 assistants just to handle the requests for materials. But the real change was happening in the shed, one conversation at a time. "My grandfather was afraid to vote," a middle-aged man shared during one session. "I never understood why until now. I always thought the civil rights movement was ancient history," a white teenager admitted. "But it's still happening, isn't it?" Leonard encouraged these discussions, guiding them toward deeper understanding. He never raised his voice or showed anger, even when topics got heated. His calm presence helped others find their own wisdom. One afternoon, a familiar face appeared in the doorway. It was Cody Fields, the youngest of the 3 boys who had attacked Leonard. He stood awkwardly, clearly unsure of his welcome. The room went quiet. Leonard simply gestured to an empty chair. "Today, we're discussing the concept of restoration," Leonard continued smoothly. "How communities heal after harm has been done." Cody listened intently, taking careful notes. After class, he lingered behind. "I've been talking to my friends at school about what I learned in the Bridges program," he said quietly. "Some of them, they're starting to get it too." Leonard nodded. "Change happens person by person, Cody. Keep talking." The workshops grew beyond legal theory. Community leaders began stopping by to share their experiences. A local historian brought records of Pinebrook's segregated past. Civil rights veterans told stories of sit-ins and marches. Angela developed special sessions for teachers, helping them incorporate civil rights history into their regular curricula. The old divisions in town began to soften as people shared stories and discovered common ground. One evening, after everyone had gone home, Leonard sat at his desk in the quiet shed. Warm lamplight fell across the pages of his journal as he wrote, "The past doesn't bury itself, but sometimes it flowers." The Pine Brook High School auditorium buzzed with nervous energy. Students filled the rows, their usual chatter subdued. On stage, the school board members sat in a line behind a long table facing the crowd. A fresh banner hung above them. "Building an Equitable Future, Together." Principal Martinez stepped to the podium. "Today marks a significant change for our school. The board has unanimously passed our new equity and inclusion policy." She outlined the key points: mandatory diversity training for staff, revised disciplinary procedures, new scholarship programs, and curriculum updates. Some parents in the back rows shifted uncomfortably. A few students crossed their arms. "To help us understand why these changes matter," she continued, "we have someone who knows our community's challenges firsthand. Please welcome Judge Leonard Carter." Leonard rose slowly from his chair, leaning slightly on his cane. The applause was scattered, uncertain. He adjusted the microphone and looked out at the sea of young faces. "When I was your age," he began, his voice gentle but clear, "I couldn't drink from the same water fountain as my white classmates. I couldn't eat at most restaurants. I couldn't even check out books from the main library." The room grew still. "That wasn't ancient history. That was my life, right here in Pine Brook." He paused, letting that sink in. "Some of you might think those days are long gone. But prejudice doesn't disappear just because laws change. It hides. It whispers. It waits." In the middle rows, a group of athletes sat with rigid backs, their faces hard. But Leonard noticed others leaning forward, hanging on every word. "You all know what happened to me in the park," he continued, "but this isn't about that day. It's about all the days that led to it. The small cruelties that grew into big ones. The jokes that weren't really jokes. The silence of those who saw but said nothing." Tears rolled down some students' cheeks. Others stared at the floor. A few maintained defiant expressions, but Leonard could see uncertainty in their eyes. This new policy isn't about punishment. It's about prevention. It's about creating a school where everyone can breathe freely, learn openly, and become their best selves. He shared stories from his years on the bench, cases where small changes made huge differences. He talked about schools that transformed their cultures, about students who became leaders, about communities that found strength in their diversity. "You might think these rules are unfair," he acknowledged. "You might feel defensive or angry. That's natural. Change isn't comfortable. But comfort isn't always right." In the front row, a girl wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Behind her, another student nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. "Each of you has a choice," Leonard continued. "You can resist these changes, holding on to old habits that hurt others. Or you can help build something better, something worthy of your generation." When he finished, the silence held for a long moment. Then, starting from the back, applause spread through the auditorium. Not everyone joined in, but enough to fill the space with hope. As students filed out, many stopped to shake Leonard's hand or share quiet words of thanks. A few asked about his legal workshops. One boy admitted, shamefaced, that he used to laugh at racist jokes, but now understood why they weren't funny. Leonard noticed a girl hanging back, clearly wanting to speak but hesitating. He recognized her features, the same sharp chin and blue eyes as Brett Halston, his attacker's younger sister. Finally, she approached, twisting the strap of her backpack. "Judge Carter?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm Sarah Halston." Leonard nodded encouragingly. I wanted you to know." She took a deep breath. Brett's not who I want to be. Leonard saw the weight of that declaration in her eyes, the courage it took to separate herself from her brother's actions. "That's a powerful choice, Sarah," he said softly, "and an important first step." She nodded, relief washing over her face, and hurried away. Later that afternoon, Leonard visited Ms. Thompson's AP government class. The students sat in a circle, each holding a copy of his Washington Post letter, "To the boys who pushed me." They took turns reading paragraphs aloud, their young voices giving new life to his words. "To the boys who thought my age made me weak. To the boys who saw my skin as a reason to hate. To the boys who believed their privilege was power." When they finished, hands shot up. Questions and comments flowed freely. These students had clearly been discussing the letter in depth. A girl in the back row, wearing a Black Lives Matter pin, raised her hand. "Judge Carter," she said, her voice strong and clear, "your letter is the reason I want to be a lawyer. You showed how the law can be a tool for real change." The converted gymnasium hummed with anticipation. Rows of folding chairs faced a makeshift podium, while law books and laptops covered the tables lining the walls. Sunlight streamed through high windows, casting warm squares on the polished floor. Leonard stood in the shadows at the back, watching students file in. They carried notebooks and tablets, chatting quietly among themselves. Some wore suits and dresses, others came in jeans and t-shirts. But they all shared the same eager look, the hunger to learn, to change things. "The Carter Fellowship for Justice," read the banner stretched across the front wall. Below it hung framed photos of civil rights leaders, judges, and activists who had shaped American law. Leonard's own picture was there too, though he'd argued against it. The room settled as Jasmine Williams, a brilliant young attorney from Howard University, took the podium. At 28, she embodied everything the fellowship stood for: sharp intelligence combined with deep compassion and an unwavering commitment to justice. "Welcome to our first youth cohort," she began, her voice carrying easily through the space. "Today we're diving into Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, focusing on workplace discrimination cases from the past decade." Leonard watched the students lean forward, pencils poised. There were 30 of them in this inaugural class, chosen from hundreds of applicants, high school seniors and college freshmen, mostly from underserved communities, each one carrying dreams of law school, of making real change. "But before we start," Jasmine continued, "I want us to remember why we're here. This fellowship exists because one man refused to let injustice stand. He turned personal humiliation into community transformation." Several students glanced back at Leonard. He gave them a small nod, then returned his attention to Jasmine's lecture. She walked them through recent cases, breaking down complex legal concepts into clear examples. The students asked sharp questions, challenged assumptions, proposed alternative arguments. Leonard recognized that fire in their eyes, the same one he'd carried into his first courtroom decades ago. A soft touch on his shoulder pulled his attention away. Angela stood beside him, watching the class with pride. "Look what you built, Dad," she whispered. Leonard squeezed her hand. They both knew this moment had cost them dearly. The threats, the late nights poring over documents, the constant pressure from those who wanted to maintain the old order. But standing here now, watching these young minds engage with the law as a tool for change, made it all worthwhile. Jasmine moved on to group exercises. The students divided into teams, tackling mock cases based on real discrimination complaints. Their discussions filled the room with energy. Passionate debates about burden of proof, statistical evidence, systemic barriers. "Remember," Jasmine called out over the buzz, "the law isn't just words on paper. It's a living thing that affects real people's lives. Your job is to make it work for justice. Leonard closed his eyes briefly, remembering his own words to countless young lawyers over the years. The law was indeed alive, and these students would help shape its future. The afternoon light began to fade as the session wound down. Students gathered their materials, still debating points from the lecture. Several stopped to thank Jasmine, asking about next week's topic. Judge Carter? Leonard turned to find Marcus, one of the youngest fellows, standing nearby. The boy reminded him of himself at 16, serious, determined, carrying the weight of his community's hopes. Yes, Marcus? I just wanted to say, that video of you, the one those boys made? It was horrible. But if they hadn't done that, none of us would be here today. Sometimes good things come from bad places, right? Leonard nodded slowly. The arc of justice takes strange paths sometimes. What matters is where it leads us. Students began filing out into the warm evening air. Leonard watched them go, these bright young minds who would carry the fight forward. Some would become lawyers, others activists or teachers. All would understand the power of standing up, speaking out, demanding better. Angela gathered her briefcase. Ready to go, Dad? Leonard took one last look around the transformed gymnasium. The banner, the books, the lingering energy of young voices arguing points of law. It was more than he'd dared hope for when he'd first proposed the fellowship. They walked toward the exit together, Leonard's cane tapping softly on the floor. Outside, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. Judge Carter, a voice called from behind them. One of the students, Sarah, he remembered, jogged to catch up. Will you come back next week? Leonard smiled, feeling the weight of all that had brought them to this moment. The park bench, the viral video, the long legal battle, the community's transformation. But mostly, he felt the lightness of hope. I'll always be here, he said. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.